Welcome to Your Family's Health, the program that focuses on healthcare issues with unique and different modalities for taking charge of your health today. Experts talk weekly with our continuing roster of guests from around the country and right here in Nassau County to keep you up to date on the latest health issues and trends. Take care of your mind, body, and soul. Spend the next half hour with the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC, and get on the journey to better health.
Hello, and welcome to Your Family's Health. This is Joan Buckley from the nursing department here at Nassau Community College. And today we're going to be talking about finding a vaccine for COVID-19 and the pandemic, but the problems in mass producing this vaccine that we hope to find. Our guest today is David Simchi-Levi. He's a professor of engineering systems at Massachusetts Institute of Technology for over 20 years, and he's the co-director of Leaders for Global Operations. His research currently focuses on developing and implementing techniques for logistics and manufacturing systems. So this, with the pandemic, is going to be huge, David, if we come up with a vaccine. How would people really expect you? Can you introduce yourself a little bit and tell them exactly what you do? I know you're MIT, you're a professor there, but how does that role and what you teach come into play with this vaccine production?
Okay, so first, welcome. Thank you for inviting me. As you mentioned, I'm on the faculty at MIT. I've been an academic for 30 years. In fact, I came to the US 30 years ago for 1 year only. And it has been a very long year. At MIT, I focus on supply chain risk management, business analytics, and related areas. But in parallel to being an academic, I started and sold a few companies. One company was in supply chain analytics that I sold in 2008, and soon after it became part of IBM technology, and then two companies I sold to Accenture. Now I'm company-less. I'm just focusing on trying to come up with effective strategies to deal with the current challenge. But what I've done in the last 10 years was a lot of work with companies and industry on supply chain risk and supply chain risk mitigation strategies. And we can learn from what companies have done in the last 10 years that will allow us to estimate and to predict what will happen when companies are trying to scale manufacturing of a new vaccine.
You know, I know everyone's very excited about the vaccine, but I think your role in this is going to be just so important. How complex is the manufacturing process to address this global pandemic? It's not as simple as just find the vaccine, right?
Yeah. It's the first challenge is finding the vaccine. And clearly this is a huge challenge because there are lots of examples of a pandemic where we could not. The science community was not able to find a vaccine. So just finding the vaccine is by itself a big challenge. The second challenge is right now there are multiple potential vaccines that are analyzed and developed. It's not clear which one will be successful, and maybe more than one. And so we have now a period of maybe 4 or 5 months until we know which vaccine is going to be effective. And we need to prepare now for something that we don't know where to focus on. And so part of the challenge today is not only scaling, but to decide what to invest in. And clearly, just investing in one vaccine when you don't know if it's going to be effective is too risky, which means that you need to invest in multiple. And when you invest in multiple, you need to make sure that once you know which one is effective, you can shift, you can convert some of the other manufacturing activities that you have developed to produce the one that proved itself to be very, very effective. So scaling is a big challenge, but it's especially a big challenge because we don't know which vaccine is going to be effective. That's really what we are dealing with. There are multiple ones. Hopefully one or two of them will be successful. We will determine maybe 4, maybe if we are lucky 5 months from now, but we need to make investment today, and it's not clear which one we should focus on.
So when you have to consider supply and demand, you really have to be fluid. Am I right? There's not going to be any one answer staring you in the face. You have to take a lot of things into consideration. And what's the global? I mean, globally, this is going to be huge for you as well. What are some of the implications of just the global issue and the manufacturing of the vaccine?
Very good. And in fact, a good way to understand why we face the challenges in supply chain and manufacturing that we see today is just to reflect on the last 10 years. In the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of investment in supply chain and manufacturing on strategies like lean, like outsourcing, like offshoring, all strategies that allow companies to cut costs. And companies have been extremely successful reducing cost in their supply chain by moving manufacturing activities, for example, to Asia, by maintaining low level of inventory. But the problem is when there is a disruption, the supply chain cannot match supply with demand. And we have seen the impact of these strategies on supply chain before, and we now see it at a larger scale with the pandemic. And of course, the problem is this is a global challenge because you have a supply chain that starts maybe in Asia and in North America and Europe. And so the globalization of supply chain, the offshoring and outsourcing significantly increased exposure to risk by many companies. Now that we are talking about vaccine, the question is, how do you design a supply chain strategy that help you scale production and produce millions and millions of drugs that can serve not only North America, but can serve global demand? And as I mentioned, part of it is scaling, part of it is the uncertainty. We don't know which vaccine will be effective.
Now, communication between everyone that's involved has to be like right on target. How do you establish that? How do you establish such worldwide communication, and you all have the same goal? And it's just incredible the way that you have to communicate all over to just watch the trend with the disease and the trend with the marketing. So what's the first thing you do when you sense this is coming? And I believe you knew in February I saw something article that said, there was a talk about it. What's the first thing you do when you expect something like this to happen, or when you expect something to happen whenever? What's the first thing that you have to do in your position to really focus on the right spot?
So you are raising really an important point. In February, I published a short article in Harvard Business Review where basically I use what I know about industry and supply chain strategies, and together with a high-tech executive, Pierre Haren, we basically predicted that supply chain will have to shut down in mid-March. We said thousands of companies will have to stop production. And the reason we were confident making this prediction was because of the supply chain strategies that we know companies invested in. And this is exactly what happened, right? In mid-March, automotive manufacturer in Europe, in North America, all stopped production. So the question is, what do you need to do in order to recover? Step one, which is directly related to your point about communication, you need to understand your supply chain. You need to understand who your suppliers are, which sounds trivial. But in a recent survey of companies, about 30 to 40% of them said, we don't have a good supply chain mapping. But even more important, not only you need to know who your suppliers are, you need to know who their suppliers are. Because if their suppliers are disrupted, your supplier will not be able to provide you with the product and the services that you are looking for. So understanding the supply chain is critical, but technology help us.
Yeah.
Technology help bring together different companies, different organizations, and also allow us to share data and provide visibility, as you pointed out, to, for example, trend in the market, trend in demand, a disruption in supply. And if we can use this data effectively, we may be able to respond. It's not clear, but we may be able to respond.
You're listening to Your Family's Health on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Joan Buckley, and today we're talking about the problems that might occur when creating a vaccine for COVID-19. And we're talking with David Simchi-Levi, a professor of engineering at MIT. He is also the co-director of Leaders for Global Operations, and his research currently focuses on developing and implementing techniques for logistics and manufacturing systems. So before the break, we were talking about that just thing, like what is involved, the communication, the distance between everyone, and just knowing what everyone and what stage everyone's at. So that's pretty incredible. If you could just talk a little bit more about that, we called it the supply chain issues. Those are huge.
Right. So the supply chain issues are huge. Supply chain, especially in the pharmaceutical industry, is very complex. And as a result, one of the things that is clear that we will see once the pandemic is over, that companies in this industry are going to take their supply chain through stress tests to identify where are the bottlenecks, where are the hidden risks, where is the hidden risk in their supply chain, and develop mitigation strategies that will allow us to solve the problems that we see today. Shortages in masks, shortages in PPEs, shortages in ventilators, and the like. But that's all in the future. Today, what companies need to do is to have the visibility into their supply chain and to start using data and analytics to identify where are the problems, when to start building capacity, and where to position inventory in order to be able to serve market demand. With respect to vaccine, the problem is even more complex because you are trying to build capacity of a product that you don't know if it's going to be effective in the market.
Mm. Do you have a lot of, when you give suggestions to companies of ways that they could track their supply, going along with what's going on in the world, do you get a lot of pushback? I would think I would welcome you in. They must be very receptive to having someone with your background to kind of, help them go in the right direction, both economically and for the global picture, especially now in the pandemic. You must be in popular demand. That's what I'm saying.
So I'm more popular today than years before. I've been talking about supply chain risk for the last 10 plus years.
Wow.
But very few companies are focusing on risk mitigation strategies and increasing the resiliency of their supply chain. And there are reasons for that. And one way to understand this is to realize that it's very difficult for companies to see the return on investment. And I'll illustrate this with an example. If you're in a company and you're in charge of reducing cost, and you were able to cut costs by 7%, it's easy to measure, it's easy to appreciate. If you are in charge of increasing revenue, and you were able to increase revenue by 5%, easy to measure, easy to recognize. But if you're in charge of risk mitigation strategies, and it does not come free, and nothing happened, how do we know that it's exactly because of what you did? And so the return on investment for a lot of companies is very difficult to estimate. There is a cost associated with resiliency. And some companies have done this. I've worked with companies that invested heavily in risk mitigation strategies, and we see the fruit of this with these companies. But many supply chain executives understand the challenge, but decided not to invest and focus more on efficiency, focus more on low-cost strategies in order to be able to compete in the market. But just being efficient is not going to help you respond to a disruption of the magnitude that we see today. And as a result, we need companies to start thinking about the right balance between resiliency and efficiency, right? The right balance between cutting costs, that's important, but also being able to respond to market demand when there is a disruption. And this is not just to complete the story. This is not the first time we see a disruption in the supply chain. We saw this after the tsunami in Japan, if you remember, in 2011, the flood in Thailand in the same year, the volcano eruption in 2010 in Iceland, and companies face significant challenges at that time. Of course, the magnitude of what we see today is completely different, but we can learn, and companies could have learned from what happened during that time to realize we need to build resiliency in the supply chain.
You also use the terms, looking at a scenario and planning for the best case is always easy to see, right? The future, you do this, you say you cut costs and everything, and the best case, you'll make money, you'll get the product delivered. And then you say always have the worst case. So you have like a view that's really very, very broad. But it seems like that is something that would work for especially something like this, where we're going to have to pick the right vaccine, right, through research and things, and then get it out there. So how can you explain that, the best case and the worst case scenarios, and have it make so much sense to people that are in business and will be affected by this, the vaccine being, spread worldwide? Yeah.
So the challenge, of course, is that there is a lot of uncertainty with respect to demand, with respect to the vaccine. So I was focusing on multiple scenarios, as you pointed out. Yeah. The best case scenario, the worst case scenario, and the most likely scenario, right? And you need to stress test your strategy to make sure that you are able to respond almost independently of which scenario happens. So the question is, how can you do that, right? And let's take the vaccine. Let's take the vaccine example. We see in the market a number of companies investing in different solutions, in different vaccines, right? We don't know which one will prove to be effective. So the strategies that governments, the federal government in the US is taking is a strategy where we are going to build manufacturing capacity before we know which vaccine is going to be effective. And we are going to build it, and that's now my interpretation of the strategy, we are going to build it with embedded flexibility so that if we realize that the vaccine that's coming from a specific company is effective, we can change quickly the manufacturing, the production line in different facilities to be able to produce that type of vaccine. So flexibility in the supply chain, meaning the ability to retrofit, to change the production line and to focus on the vaccines that prove to be effective, is probably the most important building blocks that we need right now as we are preparing to scale production. But this all assume that in 4 or 5 months we will be successful in one company, at least one company will be successful in developing the vaccine. That's a big, big, big assumption.
Is there competition in the companies? Do you see it with this pandemic? I mean, it has to affect everybody personally and then, of course, the businesses. But is there competition, or are they also working together from your perspective and your point of view?
I think there is both. There is a lot of collaboration, and there is also a race to develop first the vaccine that will prove effective. And that is all healthy. There is a race in terms of we don't know which solution will prove to be effective. So you need multiple companies trying different direction, and hopefully one of them will be successful. But you also need collaboration so that when we find the one or the two that are effective, we can change production line in multiple locations across multiple companies to be able to scale production quickly.
You're listening to Your Family's Health on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Joan Buckley, and today we're talking about the problems that might occur when creating a vaccine for COVID-19, and we're talking with David Simchi-Levi, a professor of engineering systems at MIT for many, many years, and he's also co-director of Leaders for Global Operations. His research currently focuses on developing and implementing technologies for logistics and manufacturing systems, and we were just talking about the collaboration that's needed, and in this pandemic, it's a global thing, but it's incredible systems entwining, whether it be communication or verbally or engineering. So, there was something I saw that was really very interesting, and I thought that if you finished up the show with that part, it talks about 5 steps for those scenarios. Remember, we talked about the worst and the best, and you said the intermittent one, the middle one, is probably the best one. But what are some of the steps? I think we talked about the first step, but what are some of the other steps that are included in this plan?
So the first step, we talked about it earlier, is making sure that you map your supply chain, right? That you have a good visibility to who are your suppliers and who are the supplier. And this is something that companies need to have as soon as possible. The second step is the scenario analysis that we talked about. Remember, we identify multiple scenarios. So we need to make sure that we focus on the multiple scenarios. I focus on 3, the best case, the worst case, and the most likely one. And in each case, we estimate demand and we assess which facilities are going to be disrupted and what is the impact of this disruption on our ability to match supply with demand. Once we did this step, we are ready to determine where to allocate our production, when to build capacity, what manufacturing activities to reduce, and what manufacturing activities to increase. If we need to expedite, we need to determine for how long and when to start expediting product across the supply chain. If we need inventory, components to arrive from Asia, we may not be able to wait 45 days by shipping over the ocean. We may need to ship by air. As a result, we need to book logistics capacity as soon as possible. Remember, once the recovery starts, everybody will be booking and using logistic and transportation capacity. And so it will be too late to wait until that time. If you can determine now when you need extra transportation capacity and for how long, this is a time to reserve logistics capacity.
Now, are there many labs working on the vaccine? Like, is it, and every one of them communicates with someone like yourself, right? Is there there's a global system where this is being worked on together? How many labs are actually working on vaccines? Do you know?
I am not sure. I think this is, like I said, this is a collaboration, and this is also a race. There are multiple labs in many companies, each of which is developing, trying to develop its own vaccine, and we will see which one will be effective. But the point is, while they are developing the vaccine, they need to start thinking about scaling manufacturing activities.
Yes. How is that going to be handled after something like this is over or settled down? What's the next step for someone like yourself?
So it's a very, very important question. And this is not about myself. I think
No.
we are going to see restructuring of manufacturing and supply chain. The time where people said, let's move manufacturing to Asia to reduce cost is probably over. Companies will need to redesign, restructure their supply chain so that we don't see what we have seen in the last 2.5 months. This restructuring will be different depending on industries. It will be different depending on whether you are in apparel, high-tech, pharma, and so forth and so on. Some will be easier than others. Some will be expensive and will take a long time. And if you want to take one example, and hopefully this help give an insight, take the pharmaceutical industry. In the pharmaceutical industry, right, we are talking about drugs, we are talking about vaccine. In the pharmaceutical industry, but a lot of, for many years, companies move the manufacturing of different API and chemicals to Asia. And there were two reasons for that. That's very important. One is cost. I want to move to Asia to reduce cost. But the other one is because the manufacturing of this chemical is highly polluting. There are environmental consequences. And so they move this outside North America and outside Europe. If you are restructuring and you are starting to move these manufacturing activities to Europe or to North America, this is not just about cost. It's also about clean technology. And how do you change the technology to make it more environmentally friendly? That will take a lot of time and will require significant investment.
If someone wanted to, not if someone wanted to, if you wanted someone to take something away from this interview, what would it be?
I would say
like one thing. What would you want them to remember about this?
I want them to remember that it's important to focus on building resiliency in the supply chain, but this is not simple, and it's not just about no more China. It's way more complex than just saying we should move manufacturing out of China.
That was really nice. Thank you for being here, David Simchi-Levi. You're a professor at engineering systems at MIT, and let's hope that a vaccine is found, and let's hope it can be mass-produced the appropriate way, and then whatever our new normal is, we can all adjust to it. And I really, really appreciate you coming, and this has been a wonderful way for me to view something in a different light. So I really do appreciate you coming to the show today.
Thank you.
This is Joan Buckley from the Department of Nursing here at Nassau Community College, and I thank you for listening to this week's edition of Your Family's Health.
We'd like to get your feedback on your family's health. Send your comments by emailing them to whpc@ncc.edu. Podcasts of today's show are available on iTunes, Android Podcasts, and Spreaker. This program was produced at the studios of Nassau Community College in cooperation with the Nursing Department. Join us next week for another edition of Your Family's Health on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.